I'd like to remind everyone of why we teach cooperative care training to animals. It has many benefits. These include reducing fear, anxiety, and distress for the animal, eliminating or reducing the need for force and restraint by handlers, mitigating risk of injury to animals and handlers. It increases overall welfare and it fosters a trusting relationship between animals and their keepers. The first learner in this brilliant bredli training video is Laurel. She's going on 4 years old this fall. She's one of my more experienced learners. She was one of the original 10 Morelia bredli that was in our initial behavior study in order to assess a time budget or an activity budget for Morelia bredli and figure out how they spent the majority of their time. They do spend the majority of their time off the ground using the upper half of their vertical space, and they appreciate ledges, shelves, and perches. Laurel very confidently shifted out of her enclosure onto the station. I'm about to ask her to hold in place for delivery of reinforcement. Once I deliver the reinforcement, I hang on to it for a few extra seconds. And I do that because I want the rest of her body and tail out of the enclosure and wrapped around the station. I needed to clean her enclosure, so I wanted to be able to move the station along with her out of my way so I could do that safely and without bothering her at all. Once that was done and I moved the station back to her enclosure, after it had been adjacent to her enclosure for just a few minutes, she put herself away, which is always nice when they do that. Our next learner is Tanavik. He is 5 years old. He is an experienced learner, but sometimes he doesn't do things quite as confidently or quite as consistently as a learner like Laurel does. She's slow and steady. He's going faster, and he does a brilliant job during this training session, but he doesn't always. His training is a little bit more inconsistent than Laurel's, even though she tends to take her time and go a little bit slower. But he immediately acknowledged the target and moved in its direction, and he didn't seem to have any hesitation to shift out onto the station today. Again, I changed the orientation of the target to indicate that the reinforcer's coming. I deliver the reinforcer. I hang on to it for just a few seconds. And instead of him pulling his tail down onto the station, he really pulled hard against me and he pulled his whole body back towards his enclosure. But I was able to easily get him moved so that I could clean his enclosure while he was out of the way. Now, Triangula is one half of a set of twins that we have here. She is going on 4 years old, and she is another very experienced learner who tends to take her time and move cautiously, but she always does the behavior that I ask her to do. And here she's figuring out the best route to get from where she's at out to the station that I want her to be on. She's going through a little decision making here, and she finally decides that she's going to lower herself down to the ground level of her enclosure in order to shift out. It's important to let them make these choices, these decisions on their own, so that they can confidently shift out onto the station in a manner that feels safe for them and that makes sense for them. I want her whole body out on the station. I'm doing complete enclosure cleanouts this evening. She also is very good at doing figures on the station. It's like positioning her body in a certain way, like a figure 8 or a coil. And so I'm asking her to practice that behavior just a little bit here by asking her to wrap around one of the legs of the station And she likes to explore and sometimes loses focus. So I give her a little reminder as to what I want her to do. And she re-engages with the activity. And she comes over the top of the PVC and out onto the station just like I wanted her to, so that I'm able to now move this station out of the way and get this enclosure cleaned. All of the enclosures that you've seen so far are from blackboxcages.com, and they're 5x2x2. This is Tanavik's second session. This is really interesting because I show him the target, he acknowledges it right away and turns towards it, orients towards it, starts to move in its direction. And for whatever reason, he decides that instead of coming over the top of his body and over the top of the perch, that he needs to turn around and approach the target in a different manner. I'm just holding the target in place and letting him make this decision. I don't understand why he felt that this was a better way for him to approach the target than his original route. But he just basically turned his body around and approached the target in a different way. But he completes the behavior that I asked him to do. He does it very confidently, and he gets reinforced for that. This is a quick session with Katesh. She's one of my younger learners. She's about 1.5 years old, and she's using a little bit different target than the one you saw in the previous videos. But again, very confident, very much knows exactly what she's supposed to do, which is approach the blue half of the target. And then once she gets there, pause and then look for reinforcement towards the white side of the target. She's got this down pretty well. And the next steps for her will actually be to try to get her to shift completely out of her enclosure in the future. She's also in a 5x2x2 from blackboxcages.com. This is Shepherd. He's the same age as Katesh. They're not from the same clutch, but they are from the same breeder, and that is Ralph Polinsky of Midwest Serpentarium in Illinois. Shepherd sees the target. I'm asking him to move down over his enclosure threshold, down several inches towards his ledge. I set the target on the ledge and then I just hold it still. He's one of the learners that I'm teaching to go to a stationary target without having to follow movement. It goes a little bit slower, but he's obviously learning the behavior, no problem. Thanks for watching this week, and please remember to always be kind and love your animals.